many of you guys have ever done something that you didn't really think through at the time? Like it sounded like a great idea until you did it and then afterwards realized how not good of an idea it was. Like one time I had a friend named Kyle growing up and he had a lot of land at his house, and so like he had horses and stuff, four-wheeler and pond, and the combination of those three things can be deadly if decisions are not made wisely about those things. So one time, it was winter, so there's snow everywhere. And so we thought, it'd be really fun if we did tubing. Like, you know, when you go to the lake and attach like a tube to the boat and with rope, and then you just like get flung all over the place on the lake. Like, that's called tubing. It's lots of fun. We're like, there's snow everywhere. What if we attached a sled to the four-wheeler and did like land tubing? So we did. And it was pretty fun, except for snow just kept bouncing up into our face. Like at the lake, when water splashes up in your face, you're like, it's fine, it's water, you know. But when it's snow, it's like it pats on your face, and then you can't see, and then you flip out of the thing, and then it's really not safe. But it was fun. Well, because we had such a good experience with that in the winter, when it came to the spring, we're like, we should do land tubing again. But we don't have any snow, so what should we do? Do you think a sled will work on grass? We tried. Nope, doesn't work. What else should we try? Maybe like sit on a skateboard and I'll hold it. So we tried that. That didn't work. We just dragged on the ground because the second the four-wheeler went, we got pulled off the skateboard. So that didn't work. So we tried tying ourselves to the skateboard. That also didn't work. So we need something with bigger wheels. So after a lot of trial and error, we ended up attaching a bike to the four-wheeler. And we made it probably one lap around the property before his mom came out screaming, "What are you boys doing? Stop that right now!" And it very easily could have turned into the bike handlebars, like turning sideways, and then just getting dragged and hit by this bike on the ground, like by a four-wheeler. It could have been very dangerous, of course, because we weren't wearing helmets either. So, like, not the very wisest decision that either of us have made, and his mom put a pretty swift stop to that, so we didn't get the chance really to figure out how dangerous it could have been, fortunately. But it's one of those things that it sounded fun at the time until we did it, and realized how unfun it actually was and how unwise it was. The point is, we all do things on occasion that we don't really think through all the way. We just know it sounds fun, right? And then we find out later because there's consequences, right? That actually probably wasn't a very fun idea. And so the reality is that we all struggle with making wise choices from time to time, right? There's decisions that we make that, hundreds of decisions, thousands every day that we have to make. And oftentimes, we're left between two options. One is to make an unwise choice, and one is to make the wise choice. And so if we don't stop and think, oftentimes we can fall into making the unwise choice in whatever that is. Maybe you stayed up all night binging Stranger Things when you should have been doing other things, right? Or maybe it was during the school year and you had a test the next day and you stayed up playing video games when you should have been doing your homework. Maybe you just did enough to finish your homework and turn in the assignment, but not enough to where you actually understood it to pass the exam at the end of the class, right? Or whatever it was, you've maybe made some decisions that weren't wise in the long term because you wanted something better in the short term. Making wise choices just isn't always easy. I wish it were, but if it were, then we would all make the easy choice all the time. But instead, we struggle with that because we have to choose between momentary fun versus long-term what's best for us, right? And it's much easier to think about what's right in front of us than to think in the long term. So making wise choices, for that reason, just is not always the easiest thing. And oftentimes, you've had to find out that something was an unwise choice because you had to reap the consequences later. You had to reap the consequences of getting into trouble. If you've ever snuck out of the house, you had to reap the consequences of then being grounded for like a month because you got caught. If you've ever done stuff that you know you shouldn't do, then you've had to reap the consequences more than likely. And even if you got away with it at the time, those consequences will catch up to you eventually. And it's not just one of those things that adults say to get you to not make bad choices. It does catch up with you. And so We have people in our life, parents and stuff, that tell us these things because they love us, not because they want to cramp our style or anything. But the reality is, every choice does have a consequence. Sometimes that consequence is a good consequence. Sometimes that consequence is a bad consequence. And so every decision, every choice, everything that we do does have a consequence. And so Paul, he had something pretty wise to say about this when he was talking to the church in Galatia. And if you've been here the last few weeks, we've been in this series. We've been going through the letter of Galatians, where Paul was writing to the church, and he was encouraging them about what it means to have true freedom in Christ. And today, what we're going to read, he's talking about freedom in the choices that they make. And so he's talking to the church in Galatia, and this is what he says. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 7, he says, "You will always harvest what you plant." Right? You will always harvest what you plant. Any of you guys have parents that plant things? For a while, Chelsea and I got like herbs, like where you plant stuff and then you get their seasonings that you can put in stuff. Like what you do is you plant something and then you put a label on it so that you know what it is, so that when it blooms, you got it right. But I can tell you, with my very minimal experience in planting things, is that I've never planted something like dill, for instance, and then gotten basil as the result, right? I've never planted parsley and gotten chives, right? I've always gotten what I planted, which is a pretty basic, simple human concept, right? And Paul is telling the church in Galatia, hey, you know what? You always harvest what you plant, which it seems like common sense. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. So what you need to understand is, in this context, Paul is talking about the decisions that they make, right? In the decisions that you make, you will always harvest what you plant. So if that's true when it comes to like literal plants, that comes true. Like if you plant some apple seeds, you'll get an apple tree. If you plant some cherry seeds, you'll get a cherry tree, which some are cherries. You guys like cherries? I love, one of my favorite snacks in the summer are like those black cherries that have the seed. You eat the cherry and it's juicy and sweet and tasty, and then you like spit out the seed, and it's glorious. I want some now. Anyway, but you'll harvest what you plant. And every decision that we make today is going to grow a harvest at some point in our lives later. Right? We know that this is true when it comes to everything, but Paul is making the illustration that this is absolutely true in even the decisions and the choices you make. Every decision we make today is going to grow or harvest something in our lives later. And you want those things to be good things. You don't want them to be bad things. So why is this important? This is what Paul says next. He says, "So those who live only to satisfy their own sinful nature will harvest decay and death from that sinful nature. But those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit." So, in other words, like imagine that my coffee cup here is a planter's pot, right? Imagine. And so if you are planting like selfishness, sin, if you're planting like unwise decisions right now, those will reap a harvest of consequences later that you don't want. That's not a plant anybody wants. And Paul is saying that from our own selfishness, from our own evil desires, from our own sin, when we plant that, it will grow decay and death. Death to our relationships, death to our own lives, the decisions that we'll have. It actually limits our options for later when we have to reap decay and death from our own sin. And he doesn't want that for you. He doesn't want that for anybody. And so he's drawing these conclusions based off this illustration about harvesting and planting. You want to plant the decisions now that you want to reap the consequences of later. Every decision you make today affects tomorrow. So he's basically just reaffirming and saying, hey, you have the freedom to make wise choices. You can plant whatever you want. You can plant good seed. You don't have to plant just unwise choices. You can plant wise choices now that will affect later. And so It's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something to just be like, oh, well, that's great, because I get it. It's easy to think, well, like, I'll deal with later, right? I've got enough going on now, so I'm just going to make the decision that makes the most sense to me. But that would be the very definition of unwise. Wisdom is being able to keep your eye on the whole picture. So in order to help us remember this, Paul continues. He says, so let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone, especially those in the family of faith. Saying, don't get tired of it. I know you don't always see the benefits right now, but it's absolutely worth it. So don't give up. Plant wise decisions now. You have the freedom to make wise choices. A lot of times we see, kind of like we talked about in week one, we see Christianity as rules. There's a bunch of do's and don'ts, but it's so much more than that. You actually have the freedom to make choices now that will affect you in a positive way in the future. So, if I were to ask you to just ask yourself a few questions to help you in this process moving forward, I would urge you to ask yourself first, what kind of seeds am I planting in my life right now? Okay, what are the kinds of decisions I'm making now? What are the things that I'm doing in my life right now? And what is that going to plant for me? What am I going to reap from that in the future? Okay? Think through that in your life. Next, ask yourself about the kind of seeds that you want to be planting instead. Okay? So if you want a great relationship with Jesus in the future and you don't feel like you have one now, well, then what are things that you can plant now? Start doing now that will reap a harvest of better relationship with Jesus later, right? Well, you got to spend time with him in his word, spend time in prayer. All those things, those are good things, right? Maybe you feel like you're in an unhealthy mental place and you have a hard time like overcoming pretty big emotions like fear or anxiety. Well, then what are things that you can plant now that will harvest to having more peace in the future? Well, again, you can go back to prayer. You can go back to spending time with God. You can also spend time like maybe talking to somebody who's older and wiser than you, help you process those things. You can talk to counselors. There's all kinds of things you can do. You can figure out what real wisdom is according to the Bible and how that plays into your life, because Proverbs has a lot to say about that kind of stuff, actually. So ask yourself about the kinds of seeds you want to be planting instead for the future that you want. Lastly, ask God for the wisdom, strength, and encouragement to make those wise choices, right? It's one thing to know what you should do. It's another thing to find the strength inside of you to actually do the things that you know are good for you. So ask God for that strength, for that wisdom, and for that encouragement, because you have the freedom to shape your tomorrow by making wise choices today. So as you guys get ready to just kind of go to your group and talk through some of these things and wrap up our time together, I want you to think about this. What's one wise choice that you need encouragement to make right now? What's one wise choice that you need the encouragement to make right now? That could be different for all of you, but I encourage you to think about that as you go to your groups and as you discuss this and kind of figure out what those next steps are for you. So let me pray for you guys, and then you'll be dismissed to your small groups.